Hey everyone, it's Naomi Wolf with Daily Clout, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have today two of my absolutely favorite people, furious moms, fierce activists, two ladies who, with their colleagues and friends, are really running a revolution on behalf of our kids. Welcome to Stephanie Locricchio and Aimee Villella, advocacy team at Children's Health Defense. Welcome to Daily Clout.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us, Naomi.
I'm so delighted, and I'm especially honored that Aimee is tuning in because she's in the middle of a move to the free state of Florida. So that's really, we're appreciating having, being able to get on your schedule in the middle of all these changes. So let's jump right in. You guys are, as far as I know, the only people actually doing something on behalf of all the parents and step parents like me who are really worried sick about our kids. So tell us about Walkout Week.
So parents are fed up. We know this. I mean, we've been hearing from moms and dads and grandparents all across the country regarding all the tyrannical, nonsensical, politically motivated mandates with masks and vaccines and otherwise. And people are looking for some way to show strength in numbers, to show that the power and the choice is with the parents and not with the Board of Eds. We don't co-parent with governors. We don't co-parent with the Board of Education or any of the legislative members. What we do with our children is our choice. So we were trying to figure out what we could do to show that we really are the ones in control, not all of these other people. So we came up with this concept of Walkout Week. So September 13th, we are encouraging parents to pull their children out of school in peaceful noncompliance to show that ultimately the choice is with parents. And if you're going to dictate things that we don't agree with, then we're just not going to send our kids. If there's no students, there's no school. And the beautiful thing is that teachers now want to be a part of it. So we're extending the invitation to educators to do the same.
Wow. So Aimee, tell me more. I know that
we're seeing parents all over the country just rising up in huge numbers. We're seeing the videos go viral. These parents at the Board of Ed meetings, they're coming in, they're advocating on behalf of their children, and they're just asking for choice. You know, they're standing up against these mandates and they're extremely articulate. They're sharing the data. They're showing how we know COVID, largely does not affect children at all. There's a very high recoverability rate and it really isn't warranted. But these Board of Eds and, local governments, Department of Health, they're just not listening. So it's hit this tipping point that we are seeing all around the country, so many different states where parents are just fed up and they want to take, additional action. So that's how we came up with the idea for the protest.
I love it. And Aimee, what are some examples that you're seeing or hearing about parents being fed up? Specifically, what are they fed up about? You don't have to name names if you don't want to, but just give me 2 or 3 examples of the sorts of things you're hearing on the ground.
Well, I mean, we're hearing about Board of Ed meetings with 5, 6, even 7 hours of speaking, sharing data and study. I mean, it happened down here in Sarasota County where every parent almost in the district, stood up advocating for the right for choice. And, these Board of Ed members, they still, sometimes it's a split vote, sometimes they're being pressured from the outside, but they are still steamrolling over despite sometimes government mandates that prohibit mandatory masks, such as in the state of Florida right now. So you now have a conflict between local government and the federal and the state level government. So it's become a really politically, tense, and difficult thing to navigate for these parents, but they just want choice for their children. And that's what we're advocating for them as well.
Understood. And one last follow-up question, and then I'll turn to Stephanie, get her take. But what are the reasons? What are 2 or 3 reasons parents are giving that they don't want the masks on their kids? They don't want the vaccine mandates against their own choice for their teenagers, and soon maybe even for their little, primary school age children. What are the reasons parents don't want it?
I mean, parents just want the right to choose and they don't want to muzzle their kids for a second year. I mean, I hear it all over. Parents are sick to their stomachs of the thought of sending their kids off to another year of school where their children just can't breathe freely. For a virus that has a very high recoverability rate, they just don't see the need. And similarly, they're very concerned about the vaccine being mandated for school. They know that their kids are healthy. They know that their kids can recover, and they just don't want it mandated for their kids.
Understood. And Stephanie, what are you hearing from parents about the reasons they're giving for wanting Walkout Week, wanting to make their voices heard about these mandates?
I personally am at the point when last year, my son coming out of the pandemic, he's going to be 14. And I had such a struggle trying to decide what to do with him because it was like balancing his physical well-being and his mental health coming out of the pandemic and seeing how he was. And he begged me to let him go back with the mask on. And I was sick to my stomach watching him every day wear this mask. And when the school year came up this year, I said to him, you know, the mask is going to be something that they're going to require again. He's like, no, Mom, they're not. I'm like, yep, it's coming. So I said, we really need to start having discussions in our home about what it is you want to do, because I'm not comfortable with sending you a second year. Right. And I don't know how you feel. So he told me straight out, he does not want to go back with the mask.
Wow.
And a lot of people just don't understand. The biggest thing that I hear is, okay, if we turn the desks into restaurant tables, can they then take the mask off? Like, it's just, parents are seeing the irony and the complete lack of consistency with these mandates. It's like our children have to bear the burden of breathing in their own respiratory waste all day long, but I can go down the shore to DJ's and have my mask off and be crowded shoulder to shoulder with people sweating all over each other. But our children have to wear masks in school all day. It makes absolutely no sense. So I think parents are finally seeing that.
Let me jump in there. When parents bring these concerns up to boards of education, that the data don't support children being at great risk and that there are harms to kids, social, educational, and just as you mentioned, breathing in your own exhalation, which isn't good for you, hard to concentrate, hard to learn. What is the response, the scientific evidence that boards of health are giving parents that masks are warranted? Is there any science that boards of health are giving, to your knowledge?
They really don't respond with any science. I mean, I was asked by a group of friends to speak at my own former school district. You know, I had been homeschooling for 2 years in New York State ever since we lost the religious exemptions. Mm-hmm. So my children weren't even in the district, but I still went and spoke on behalf of my friends. And I stood up and presented a number of studies. We had about 18 to 20 other parents who did the same thing. And they just sit there quietly listening, taking some notes, maybe heads down in their phone, ignoring the parents. And ultimately they say, well, our hands are tied, it's coming from the state. So they are in a very powerless position in some cases where they then say, sorry, we're not going to advocate for you, which is wrong because these are elected officials. They are supposed to be our voice in the community, doing what's best for our kids in our community and our school districts.
So when they say our hands are tied, it's coming from the state, is that how school boards are supposed to work? Or isn't there actual kind of legislative mandate to serve the community that elected or appointed them, right? They're not state employees, is that correct, or are they?
Exactly. No, they should be serving their local community and the needs of their community, what the community values, what the community is telling them, what the community wants. In many cases, they're just ignoring them. And I think we really need change from the inside out, where more parents are now running for Board of Ed positions, as Stephanie is going to do in her town, to really, influence where we need to.
Absolutely. And then just to push a little bit, and then I'll turn to Stephanie. When parents say, what is your data, Board of Health, instead of only bringing out their own data, do they get any data saying this is why we're making this decision? This is why your child has to be masked, has to be vaccinated?
Yeah, it's just talking points. Yeah, they don't provide the data because quite honestly, the data doesn't exist. But there's talking points of layered protection. And this is what the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends. And when you really dig into their data, it's actually incredibly misleading. Right. They take a look at the influenza death rate among children, and they look at that for only a year period compared to almost 19 months of the coronavirus data. So there's a lot of fear tactics that's involved when they start to try to, support the rationale for masking kids in school.
So they're providing talking points or the CDC rather than actual original peer-reviewed research. That doesn't surprise me. That's a methodology we've seen throughout the pandemic with the data. So Stephanie, let's go to you. Why did you and Aimee decide to recommend or to lead a national movement to keep kids home from the 13th to the 18th? What are the actual dates?
September 13th to the 18th, that entire week, Monday through Friday. And the reason we decided to do it is because there has to be some way for parents to show that ultimately the decision is theirs. And I think that my whole thing with parents is when you're frustrated, we need to take those emotions and not get stuck in the emotion and the helplessness and all the things that they want us to feel, the division, the judgment, the criticism, all the things that happen. But we need to take that emotion and channel it into action to show that the power is with the parents. So taking the stand, pulling your kids out, really showing up in protest, to me, there's no greater lesson that you can give your children that freedom is not free. It's something that we need to constantly be out there reminding these elected officials that they work for us, that we're ultimately the ones that decide what happens with our body and our children.
I think that's fantastic. And you mentioned that people can also show up at the school. So what are the actual actions parents can take? I'm a stepmom. I have a 10-year-old. My husband and I are distraught that he's going to be masked this year inside, not outside, with, again, no data, and it's a fairly reasonable school district in a tiny community. What could we do? Can we show up at the school every day in addition to keeping our 10-year-old or his 10-year-old that I have a privilege to step parent at home?
Absolutely. I mean, each state is going to vary. So we're looking for people to step up as leaders in their states and to organize on the ground. I know here in New Jersey, getting to our state Department of Education is something that's fairly easy. So we could absolutely show up at our state Department of Education. If it's a long drive for you, I know in certain states it could be 2-3+ hours to get there. Showing up at your local school, showing up at a Board of Education meeting in peaceful protest, having a big presence is a huge thing. The other thing that people can start doing is really, like Aimee said, running for Board of Education, having a seat at the table. I have so much on my plate, but it's so important for me to have a voice in what's going on inside my son's school that I did throw my hat in the ring, and I am running for Board of Education in my town. So I'm hoping to have a seat at that table come next year.
That's really exciting. Meanwhile, we have to protect the kids this year.
Yeah.
But I think it's thrilling that you're helping people think about running. And I'm sure you'll provide resources as well for candidates over time who decide to run for school board. That said, you raise an interesting question, devil's advocate, right? I used to be a single mom. A lot of households are single parent households. How can I keep my child home and look after my child and show up at the school to protest? That presumes a 2-parent household, one might say, critics might say. So can I bring my child with me outside the school to the protest? Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, parents can absolutely bring their kids. I've brought my young children as babies, even as infants, to so many different medical freedom protests and rallies over the years. It actually is a great lesson for our kids to see this and to see parents standing up. This is part of our, own civil, responsibility to have our own voice. So parents can bring their children. This will be a safe space. It's peaceful noncompliance. So whether you're at your local school, at your, state capitol, or at your Department of Board of Ed, the children can be there with you. And it will vary by every state. So for example, in the state of New York right now, they have a bill that will make the COVID vaccine mandatory for school children. And the mask mandate came directly down from the new governor, Hochul. So in that case, it makes sense for these parents to be up in Albany at the state capitol. Whereas, for example, in a state like Florida, the masks are prohibited. So the school boards that are now making it required are actually going against the state government. So in that case, it makes sense to apply local pressure. So that's why it's really important for each state to step up and have a volunteer to determine where should that pressure be applied within your state and your communities. It will vary.
I hear you. I personally feel like children and parents massing outside of schools every day is a very powerful visual. It's easy for groups in Albany to be kind of wiped out of the media matrix. But I hear you that every community is making their own determination about where parents and kids should show up. I do love that idea of, parents showing up with their kids, but not sending them into the school. It reminds people that parents are in charge. The kids don't belong to the state. The kids don't belong to Governor Hochul. I'm shocked as a New York State resident that Governor Hochul, whom I've interviewed, who seemed like a reasonable person, is issuing a mask mandate. What is the reason that governors are giving, again, for the mask mandate, if any?
It's power. This is a measure.
But what reason do they give verbally? What do they say?
Safety of our children, and because they're not vaccinated. So for people, for a long time, my frustration has been people didn't want to be out there protesting masks. And what I've been saying since the beginning of this is the mask is directly related to the vaccine. The mask is the placeholder for the vaccine mandate that will follow. And it will. We're seeing it all over the place. So if you're not standing now, you're waiting to the point where it's almost too late. We need to stand up now for our children. So it's inconvenient and difficult for parents to pull their children out of school. And I absolutely get that. But we're at a point where we need to choose our hard. It is hard to pull your children out of school. It is hard to tell your child that you can't go back to college that you love because you have to get this vaccine. But it is harder to take an experimental injection in many cases and not know what the long-term side effects are going to be. So we need to choose our hard. We need to stand our ground and hold the line, not only for our children right now, but for all the future generations of children that don't even know that we're fighting for them. Because the truth is, what we do in this moment is going to determine so much about the future of this country.
Absolutely. Well said. And I just want to note that I read the Toronto Sun today, and they had a report kind of buried by the Ontario Department of Health that showed that over 200 young people, like disproportionately young men and youths, teenage boys and young adults, were suffering from myocarditis and pericarditis. So, really serious outcomes for a group that's not at high risk of bad outcomes from COVID. So let's go to two more questions. I want to talk about speech, but we'll get to that. And I want to talk about staff and teachers. I was very struck. I have to say, teachers at a school I won't name are not showing up the first day or two of school. Really interesting. I don't know why. We're not being told why. I know you're hearing from teachers and staff who also want to participate. I'd love for you and then Aimee to speak to that.
Yeah, so I was at a protest in New Jersey and I announced walkout week. And when I put the microphone down to walk 100 feet from where I was to the tent to get my bag, I was bombarded with teachers. Can we please walk out? And I'm like, you don't need my permission to walk out. If you're dissatisfied with the requirements to return back to your profession, absolutely walk out, and we will include that language in our walkout week. So educators, not just teachers, but administrative staff, guidance counselors, if you are being mandated to do something that you are not comfortable with, take your power back. Without administration and students, the schools will ultimately suffer.
Excellent. I love the fear. Aimee, go ahead.
We already know there are 4 states that are mandating it for teachers. So New York, New Jersey, state of California, and the state of Washington. So, and it's going to creep up across the country, even more states. So there are staff and teachers all over the country that are now being put in a position where, they have to choose their livelihood and the careers that they love and teaching children over, taking this experimental injection. So it's not just children that, are upset about, and parents upset about not being given choice. It's adults and teachers and, lifelong educators as well.
So what do staffers risk, and what are the teachers' unions that are supposed to be representing these people saying when their union members who pay dues are saying, why aren't you standing up for me? Why aren't teachers' unions suing these states as they have in other states, or as other unions have in other states?
In many cases, they're the ones pushing the mandate. So in New York City, it's the union. They're turning their back on their own members. They have thousands and thousands of teachers who've been contacting the union president saying, we do not want to take this experimental injection, and the unions are turning their backs. So now
what that is? Any idea what that is? Why?
I think there's money involved. We know that the Randy Weingarten, the head of UFT, her spouse was given a position within the Biden administration just recently.
Oh, what a conflict of interest.
So there's a massive conflict of interest, and like anything, follow the money. So I'm sure that's a part of it. And, it's also an issue of just one size fits all. People don't understand that everyone is an individual. Maybe they've already had COVID. Maybe they've fully recovered and they have antibodies. We have wiped out the concept of natural immunity from the face of this earth, thinking that the only way to stay healthy is this injection, which is just not true. It's just not true.
Well, let me jump in with a final question. I know we've got a hard stop shortly. The saddest thing, I want to just share 2 anecdotes. I went to my local library and there was a 4-year-old girl, and she was in that state of joy when you first go to a public library when you're 4 or 5 and you realize you can look at all the books and it's just magical and it's worlds of imagination and it's unstoppable and it's empowering. And she wasn't wearing a mask. And I saw her mom say to the librarian who had to wear a mask, she doesn't want to wear the mask. And then I saw the most traumatic thing I've seen as a parent for a long time, which was this poor librarian who wants this child to love the library, had to get on her knees with different pretty masks that they had. And the mom had to get on the other side of the child, and they had to gently but firmly force this screaming child to wear a mask. Never again will she love running into a public library. She'll associate it with trauma and not with joy. And I just want to share one other thing. I turned to my stepson and said, are you looking forward to the first day of school? He's going to 5th grade. It's awesome. And he made a face and he said, I don't want to wear a mask. And I said, why is that, honey? And he said, it's hard to breathe. So that's like not a pundit. It's not political. It's not left versus right. Our children are saying it's hard to breathe, and they're associating that with school. And I'll tell you, as a writer, I would never be able to write a book if I had to wear a mask while I was trying to think big thoughts and get them down on paper. And the last thing I want to say is I've heard from people like Megan Mansell, whom I interviewed, a speech therapist and PPE expert in Florida, that children learn to speak by looking at teeth, tongue, facial expression. They learn social cues by reading micro expressions, and that we're seeing a loss in social and cognitive functioning among children because of the forced masking. Do either of you want to speak to the cognitive issues raised or the social issues raised by forced masking? Aimee, why don't you take that one first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I think this is a massive experiment on our children, and one that I never participated in. So my children, I refused to mask them. I knew it was not necessary. We were a homeschooling family, so we had that liberty and autonomy. They were in a co-op with 40 other kids, all unmasked, thriving and living happy. And now we moved to a state where we still have that freedom. My kids are in a school that does not require masks. None of the children wear them. Over 700 students on campus with no issues. And we see these children just thriving and happy and smiling and seeing faces, seeing emotional cues as they should be. And I think that's a great point. I mean, children are going to be impaired in terms of receiving information, their emotional cues, hearing, just picking up the information, the content, and just their human and interpersonal skills. I think the mask is so traumatizing for children. And I think it sends a signal for them to live in a state of fear.
Absolutely.
And putting you in that fight or flight mode at all times.
At all times.
That's embedded into their psyche. And that's why I just refused to participate in it. And I would do anything to protect my children and keep it that way. And I think more and more parents are now realizing they do have that power and they can make those choices too. And it may not be easy. It may not be, the simple thing to do, but we are the only ones looking out for our own children.
Absolutely. And I do think that for kids, seeing their parents fight against this does contribute to their mental health. That's true of any traumatic situation. If the parents just give in, it doubles the trauma, I believe. Stephanie, did you want to speak to the cognitive and emotional and, intellectual deficits that we might see or we might be seeing already with masking children in school?
I saw it with my own child last year. I mean, he went back to school thinking that it was going to be the school that he left. And I watched literally day by day him come home, and the joy and the excitement of going to school just dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. And I watched his grades. He went from being a straight A student his entire life. He's going into the 9th grade, never had a grade below 87. I think that was the lowest grade on his report card. He was failing 3 subjects because he couldn't eat lunch with his friends in school. They had to sit separately. They couldn't touch each other. They couldn't play gym. I mean, it
had to sit separately. Why?
In their own classroom. They had to remain socially distant because they had their masks off while they were eating. So they had to remain socially distant. So sitting at a table with your friends and laughing and joking and talking, all the things that he looked forward to were essentially taken away. So when we started having the conversations about this year, he said to me something about, well, I just want to see my friends and socialize. And I said, let's think back, because you're romanticizing once again what you think school is going to be. Were you able to sit with your friends at lunch during the day? Were you able to play gym? Were you able to touch your friends or talk to them? No. Okay, so what socialization are you having inside of the building? You can still see your friends after they're done with school and after you're done with whatever it is we're going to do. So when I put it in those terms, it's amazing to see how he processed it on his own. And he came back to me a couple of days later and he's like, you know what, Mom, you're right. I don't want to go back. And it was literally one of the best moments of my life to know that he was on the same page, because this whole experience for me has been torturous. Like watching him get on this bus and pull this mask up every day.
It's excruciating. It's excruciating. And I just want to say, I'm not going to name 10-year-olds, but I have seen children of that age in school coming home with no affect, like literally speaking in monotone, speech levels declining compared with children the same age, you know, that I know from elsewhere who were not being subjected to this, who remained engaged, articulate, speech developing, social expressiveness developing. And I agree with you, it is a massive experiment. Well, sadly, I need to let you go. You guys are heroes. How can people support you? How can people join in? What should they do? I'm just gonna note, pushing a little bit, a lot of people are too overwhelmed right now to organize their own thing. So if they don't want to organize their own thing, how do they do your thing, right? How do people
if they visit us at childrenshealthdefense.org, right on the homepage, you can click on that and read all about Walkout Week. We have the details there. There's many action steps to take. We kind of detail all 5 of them to take within that week. And we will have local communities leading that effort. We're probably going to plug back in with more details on the site of what's going to happen state by state.
So if people sign up on your website, will they get notified about where the local action is? Is that how it works? Or do they have to keep checking the website to find out?
The best thing to do is to look up Children's Health Defense has local chapters as well as Health Choice all over the United States. And we've been in contact already with those organizations. We have a couple other that we're waiting to hear back from. So we might have some exciting announcements coming soon. But there are many chapters throughout the United States. So the best thing locally is to plug into those local chapters where efforts are already being organized in those states. And you can plug into those states. You can reach out to us at advocacy@childrenshealthdefense.org. That is the email address. If you have any specific questions or you're unable to find a chapter, we can do our best to help coordinate you with someone on the ground in your state.
So, and otherwise, I would look up Children's Health Defense New York chapter or Children's Health Defense Wisconsin chapter, if that's where you live. Is that correct? For Walkout Week. Awesome, fierce warriors for the kids. Thank God you're stepping up. Someone had to, and you did it. And I love that. And people are stepping up with you all over the country. Let's make it a giant success, everybody. This is Naomi Wolf from Daily Clout. And that was Stephanie Locricchio and Aimee Villella, the advocacy warriors for the children at Children's Health Defense. Thank you.
Thank you,
Naomi.